Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the Mad Mamluks. I'm Mahin, and I'm joined today by my co-host Sim. And on today's show, we welcome back our number one most downloaded guest, Ismail Royer. Ismail, assalamu alaikum. How's it going?
Wa alaikum assalam. Alhamdulillah, it's going really well.
Man, your show with us about your story, I think starting from like 92 to the time you landed in prison, really, man, people, the comments we got, people love that show. I mean, one guy told me, you guys need to stop podcasting. You can't get any better than this.
Yeah.
It's like once you've made it that big, it's like, yeah, there's nowhere else to go but down. So, mashallah, people really, I think your story really resonated with people. And I think, I had a fortunate opportunity to meet you, I think just last weekend in D.C. And just like, and you know, the thing about being Muslim, I always recall is like, we were with Rashid Dar, who's a guy, that we've talked to as well. We're at his place, and like, these guys, both you and him are people I just recently met. But I think the brotherhood of Islam is something that's so deep that we just don't, that sometimes we shouldn't take it for granted. I think you tell people from other traditions that I don't know if they have that or not. I know last night, Sim and I had a chance to meet with one of our listeners from Canada. He happened to be in town, and just like I don't know, would you think it's like you meet somebody, man. And you're just like, it's like you're like best friends that you've never, even though your first time you're meeting the guy.
First of all, it's like we're so few and far in between practicing Muslims, at least, who are involved in some kind of dawah or whatever we're doing here. We need to work together, and it just seems like out of 10 million Muslims that are in the West, Australia, Canada, UK, and the United States, it seems like, I think I would probably say 10 to 20,000 people who are even really involved in dawah in some way, in terms of setting up something online, in media and whatever, So just forming those bonds and those alliances that, hey, we're gonna watch each other's back, and we're gonna look out for each other, and working towards that. That's so important.
And I think as well, but first of all, Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. I think as well that, inshallah, when you all have the same intentions, which is to please Allah, and when you have desire for good for the Muslims, and you have desire for good for non-Muslims as well, and that's like when you're on that page, then really you can vibe together, and I think that's why we meet each other at any time, and we recognize in each other's faces immediately who we are. They say real recognizes real, so
yeah.
Let's kind of start off where we left off last time. It's almost like just as we wrapped up the actual timeline of the events last time, you were working at the law firm, and if you recall, I think CBS News or one of the news was a Time magazine. I think they called Newsweek. Was it? They called, and not knowing you were working for the law firm at the time, and they said like, oh, we were just trying to. We heard that the FBI is going to arrest Randall Royer on Monday.
Yeah,
and they eventually got you the Friday. They didn't wait till Monday, and you mentioned that was the last day of freedom you had until just several months ago, early 2017. And I think when people, like a lot of people don't know, when we mentioned that you're our number one show, a lot of times, first thing I just say is like, yeah, this brother, he spent 14 years in jail, 2.5 years in solitary confinement. I even had some of my non-Muslim coworkers listen to your show because it was so, like, the story was so mind blowing.
Yeah.
But like, talk to us from that point on, like your last day of freedom, and then just kind of walk us through like what happened after that, so to speak, and then we'll probably delve into some issues and interject accordingly.
What happened is that I thought that I was going to be arrested on Monday, and so Thursday night I went to sleep thinking that the next morning I was going to go to a news conference that my lawyers, Ali Tamimi's lawyers, and my co-defendants' lawyers, who we knew were going to be arrested along with us. We arranged to have a this news conference at the National Press Club, and I thought that I was going to be going to this in the morning, and so I went to sleep Thursday night. My dad flew in from St. Louis so that he could do the go to the news conference with me and with the lawyers, and so my dad was there. Went to sleep Thursday night with my wife, and 6 o'clock in the morning, the extremely loud banging noise on the door, bam, bam, bam. FBI, they came in, and I went out. I jumped up and went to go answer the door and showed, just to make sure that they could see my hands, because I had my kids were in there and my dad was there, and I didn't want any problems. Obviously I was just ready to go along, peacefully. So, I opened the door, showed my hands, everything's fine, whatever, let them arrest me. My daughter, Fatima, who was about, 3 at the time, was sitting on the, she was actually, I think 5. She was sitting on the couch watching the whole thing. She'd woken up. And so she was sitting there watching everything, and my son as well. And so they took me, and I went into a car. They took me into the FBI took me in a car to the FBI building, and sat me down and asked me if I wanted to waive my rights and give them a statement. And I said no. I need to speak to my lawyer. As I'd been saying, they'd been trying to talk to me for several months, and I said no. No, guys, like I said, I'm going to need to have my lawyer with me. And so they then booked me or whatever, and then took me to the Alexandria courthouse holding facility. And they told me, you may be seeing some of your friends coming along here any minute. And I was like, okay, well. And so I'm sitting in the courthouse holding facility, just kind of like leaning with my head against the wall, thinking, what in the heck? How did I get myself into this situation? And then in comes a couple of friends of mine, Idris Sarat, and then here comes Masood Khan, and then here comes all these other people. So I was like, subhanallah, what is happening here? So here I'm sitting there, we're sitting in this holding cell with all of our paintball buddies, and we're looking at each other like, oh my God, what did we get ourselves into? So. Then they took us for, someone's lawyer came and saw them and gave them a copy of the indictment, because we hadn't seen the indictment. The indictment had been sealed up until then. So they brought the indictment with them back from, they saw their lawyer, they brought it back to the holding cell, and we're all looking at it and we're like, man, where did they get all this information from? It was just like a lot of just, detail, and I'm looking at it, I'm like, well, you know what? There's a grain of truth to a lot of this, but they've somehow put a spin on it to where like, we're violating 18 different laws or something, and I was just not aware that, that my actions on behalf of, Kashmir and stuff like that were violating all these laws. And later we challenged it, of course, in court, and said, this is, these charges are bogus. They don't hold up under the law. And, the judge, rejected our motion to dismiss the indictment and said, no, this is proper use of the laws. If these actions actually took place, if the defendants took these actions, then this would violate the law. So, I came to realize slowly that actually, we were in some deep trouble, and this wasn't going to be something that we were just going to easily be able to walk out of. And it was the weirdest thing after, we went to our preliminary hearing. And for some reason, the prosecutor, I didn't have an attorney at the time. For some reason, the prosecutor at the arraignment said, Your Honor, Mr. Royer's attorney is Kamal Nawash. So Kamal Nawash is a local, colorful character, Arab American type of guy who's, I don't know, for some reason, it was just a weird moment for me, because Kamal Nawash was like a guy known for like hating like me and hating like the Muslim Brotherhood oriented Islamic organizations in DC that I've been working for 10 years, so I was like, Kamal Nawash, what? That was like someone pointing, like if Majid Nawaz was an attorney, and the prosecutor says Majid Nawaz is his attorney. That's what it was like to me, So I was like, oh, this is a conspiracy from beginning to end. I was all paranoid. But anyway, then they took me after the arraignment. They took me back to jail, and so I remember thinking, how would I handle jail? Would I be able to handle it okay or whatever? And how would I act? And because I'm not like a street guy or anything. And so they, the Alexandria jail, is a pretty I don't know. As places go, it's not too bad of a place, but it's there's a lot of gang members there, MS-13, and just due to the area, and a lot of guys from DC, from the city there and stuff like that. So the jail is probably about 45% black, 45% Hispanic, and about 10% other, and most of those other are like Asians, so so I'm white, so it was a very strange experience, mainly because people make a lot of assumptions, so they assume in jail, and I'm just going to be real here, people see a white guy in jail and they think, oh, this guy's soft, and so people will test you a lot, so I got tested a lot in that jail.
Did you have to come in and make an impression? That's what they always say, at least from the movies, that you have to go in and beat up the little guy first and show them what a badass you are. And then...
No, it's not like that. It's just that you're gonna you just have to keep your head up, and you have to walk with your shoulders squared, and you have to keep your wits about you and be very respectful to people, but at the same time have an attitude that also is like clear that you're not scared of other people, even if you are, because everyone's scared, everyone's got some anxieties and that type of thing, but you can't in any way show it. You have to have a permanent look on your face that is not threatening to others. On the one hand, is not belligerent, but on the other hand, is not like weak and so that's a very difficult. It's a tightrope to walk, but you eventually become second nature. So that county jail was not the problem for me there. I didn't really have a problem so much with violence or whatever, although there was a certain amount of that. But the real issue there was fighting my case. So I'm over in that county jail trying to fight my case, going to the law library every day. I'm trying to deal with my wife.
There's a library at the jail.
Yeah, every facility is supposed to have by law a law library where you have access to, the law and stuff, and you can research your case. And so that's what I was doing every day as I was spending hours in this law library trying to figure out what the heck I was charged with. What are these statutes? What is 2339A? What is 2339B? What is the Neutrality Act? What is what's 924C? What, use of a firearm during in relation to a crime of violence. I was charged with like 15 different firearms charges, and like most of them were in Pakistan, so I'm like, how am I being charged with using firearms in Pakistan in the United States, in the United States court? This didn't make sense to me. So there were all kinds of things that I had to start trying to figure out and start trying to learn about, and I was already pretty familiar with the legal system, having, worked in, the civil rights employment law at CARE for many years. But I had to start I had to start becoming familiar with an area of the law that I had not really dealt with much. But my previous legal experience gave me a basis for, pretty quickly getting a handle on what my charges were about. And so, I helped to write many of my pretrial motions, and I gave my notes and stuff to my lawyers, and they used that stuff and thought it was very good. And as a matter of fact, one of the arguments that I was making back then in 2003 may wind up, inshallah, getting Ali Tamimi released this in the coming months. Now I'll talk more about that. But because it's a very big deal. So we're waiting on a Supreme Court hearing, and there's some drama there for legal nerds, which I'll explain about. But in any event, what happened is that as I was looking at these laws, I started to see that if the government was able to convince the judge that this indictment was theoretically sound, in other words, like that if these acts were committed, then that would violate these laws. Okay, if they were able to convince the judge that these laws actually applied to these facts, then we would be screwed, because we had people who, as I mentioned, 5 of my co-defendants almost immediately started cooperating. And they had actually been cooperating from before we were even indicted. They've been cooperating. So that's actually how they had all this information in the indictment. And so what happened is that because in conspiracy law, and this is very important to realize, if you're charged with a conspiracy, then the people who are charged as your co-conspirators, anything that they say about you is going to be given a great deal of weight. So let's say like I and John Smith over here decide to rob a bank, okay, and we go and we buy some ski masks, and then we say, you know what? Let's bail on this idea. This is a stupid idea, and we decide not to follow through with it. Now, let's say John over here, John Smith, later gets arrested for selling drugs. And John Smith says, the government says, hey, we're going to put you away for 30 years unless you give us some information about some crimes that you know about. And he says, well, yeah, you know what? Me and Ismail, we agreed that we would rob this bank, and we even bought ski masks, but we abandoned the idea. And so the government says, oh, really? And so then they charged me with conspiracy to rob a bank, and they're charging me with, I'm facing now 10, 20 years. Why? On the basis of the fact that, number one, we agreed on something, and number two, that what we agreed to do was a felony. So it doesn't matter if you never follow through with it. The agreement itself is the crime. The agreement to commit a felony is itself a conspiracy, which is punishable by actually 5 years. And then if there's a firearm involved, like let's say instead of the ski mask, we decided to buy a gun, and we bought the gun. And then we just abandoned it and we threw the gun in the river. The fact of that gun having been involved in this case at all now makes it a mandatory minimum of 5 to 25 years, depending on how the government wants to apply the facts, or what the details of the facts are. So, and this guy who is now telling the government this and gets me indicted, if he goes and he testifies in court, his statements about me are going to be absolutely determinative. If he is testifying that this happened the way that the way that the government's saying that it happened, and his story is consistent, like it's not internally not making sense, but if it's consistent and everything, then I'm screwed. I'm going to prison, and so why? Because it's the conspiracy. So we were charged. Everything we were charged with were conspiracies. We were not charged with any what's called substantive offenses. We weren't charged with actually invading India. We weren't charged with actually supporting Al-Qaeda or something. We were charged with conspiring to do these things. And so then you have, on top of that, you have these 924C charges. 924C is use of a firearm during in relation to a crime of violence. So the crime of violence is the conspiracy. The Fourth Circuit, which is the circuit that we're in, out of Richmond, based in Richmond, Virginia, has said that conspiracies are crimes of violence as defined in 924C, the statute. So the crime of violence is defined in 924C as any offense that has a substantial risk that the use of that force will be used against the person or property of another. That's a very important definition, because what I was looking at when I was researching this stuff in the law library in 2003 was, how is a conspiracy? How does that risk violence? Because let's say me and John Smith over here agree to do something, there's no risk of violence there. If we wind up following through with our plans, now there's possible violence, but just a mere agreement, there's no risk of violence in a mere agreement. So my theory was that conspiracy in and of itself is not a crime of violence as defined by this gun statute, by this firearm statute. And I was saying that the Neutrality Act is not a crime of violence, because the Neutrality Act, this is one of the things I was charged with, which is setting on foot a military expedition against a friendly nation, which was India. So I was saying that it's merely setting on foot something, getting together basically a group of guys and saying, hey, let's invade India or something like that, right? So merely just getting together and planning this thing is not in and of itself a risk of violence. So this was my argument back in 2003, and my lawyers, God bless them, they actually took my arguments and put them into motions and tried to get the indictment dismissed, or at least the firearms charges dismissed, because the firearms charges carried mandatory minimum sentences of up to life in prison. And the conspiracies, there were like 6 conspiracies charged. They themselves carried a mandatory maximum, a statutory maximum of like 15 years in prison. So if we could have gotten the firearms charges dismissed, we would have been left only with the conspiracy charges, and we would not have been facing that much time. So they're the worst case scenario. If we could have gotten the firearms charges dismissed, if the judge would have agreed that, yeah, you're right, these conspiracies that are being charged are not crimes of violence as the definition, as the statute, the firearms statute defines it, then I'm going to dismiss these firearms charges. If she'd have done that, then we would have been, instead of facing life in prison going to trial, we would have been facing only 15 years, which, perhaps would have been something worth gambling on. But in any event, what happened was that the judge rejected our arguments. Okay,
so real quick, the firearms charges were from your work with Lashkar Taiba, or was it when the cop found? Remember, you got pulled over after 9/11, and there was like a gun in the Quran and like your passports in the car.
Right. So I was charged with several firearms charges. I was charged with possession of a firearm during in relation to a crime of violence. That possession charge was related to the gun that was found in my car right after September 11th that I was trying to sell. So how was that possessed during in relation to a crime of violence? They said because I was in a state of conspiring at that time. And so not that I was involved in any violence, but I was in a state of conspiring. And so the conspiracy being a crime of violence, because I had a gun in relation to that, because I was using the gun for target practice or something like that, then that was, that was, I mean, it sounds totally insane, but under the law, that actually my judge found that was a legitimate use of the firearms charge, and that the statute applied to this behavior. So there was the possession of the firearm. Okay, then there was use of a firearm. I had use of a firearm during relation to a crime of violence because they said that my firing an anti-aircraft gun at Indian positions in Kashmir was was during in relation to the conspiracy to invade India, or to fight against India. So we said, hold on a minute. First of all, as we said, as I mentioned, that even though I was actually admittedly shooting at Indian soldiers, but at the same time, the charge was not shooting at Indian soldiers. The charge was conspiracy to set on foot a military expedition. So I was charged with a conspiracy. Okay, so what I was actually, even the fact that even though I was admittedly, involved in, violence and shooting at Indian troops, nevertheless, the actual charge in the indictment is conspiracy. So if conspiracy is not a crime of violence, then this anti-aircraft gun can't be used. I can't be charged with it. Now, but what happened is that our other argument was, and as I mentioned, the judge didn't buy that. The judge said, no, conspiracy is a crime of violence and blah, blah, blah. But what the other issue was that we said that how can I be charged in a United States court for shooting a gun in Pakistan? How is that even possible? So what the judge found and held was that 924C has extraterritorial effect, meaning that so not to get into too much detail here, but laws in general that Congress passes are deemed not to be applicable when you commit those offenses outside the United States. There are some exceptions, and the exceptions are when the statute itself actually says that this statute applies outside the United States. So, for example, murder says, that it applies outside the United States, murder of like government officials or something like that. That statute says specifically that it applies outside the United States. the terrorism statutes say that they specifically apply outside the United States. So the gun charge 924C does not say that. So we argued that therefore it can't be applied outside the United States. But the judge found that because part of the conspiracy had occurred in the United States and outside the United States, and because conspiracy does have effect outside the United States, then the gun charge, because it's predicated on the conspiracy, of necessity also has effect outside the United States. So I know I apologize for this, possibly overly detailed explanation of the law here, but the point being that this is why these gun charges were able to stick against us. And this is why we were all facing life in prison as we, went to trial. Now, after the judge denied our pretrial motions and said, no, you can be charged outside the United States, and conspiracy is a crime of violence, and Neutrality Act is a crime of violence, and if you did it, then if these actions had actually been taken, if these defendants actually did these things, then that would violate these laws. Okay, so that's what she said in denying our motions to dismiss the indictment. So when I heard that and when I read her ruling, I said to myself, okay, well, since we have 5 people at least ready to testify that we actually did these actions, and since the judge just held that if you actually did these actions, then that violates these laws, therefore, it's like a syllogism, therefore, we're screwed. Because therefore, if we go to trial, these guys are going to testify that we did these things, and we're all going to prison for life. So my lawyer had been trying to persuade me to plead guilty, and I kept on saying, I'm not pleading guilty. I was the lead defendant at the time, because at that time, Ali had not been charged. Ali was really the guy that they were going after, but since they, for whatever reason, made the decision not to charge him at that time, and I think the reason they did that is because what he was accused of doing was merely giving like a 15-minute talk. So I think that they decided they were going to not try to charge him then, but rather would wait and see how the case against us proceeded, and if they were successful, then to try to charge him later down the road, which in fact is exactly what they did. So I told my lawyers at that point, after our judge denied our pretrial motions, I told them, all right, well, I'll consider pleading guilty, but I want to make sure that my other co-defendants all have deals offered to them, and I want us all to plead guilty at the same time. And the reason I wanted that was because I didn't want to be put in a position of betraying them in terms of either A, like ducking out of a situation without, sticking together or whatever. And then also, I obviously didn't want to be put in a position where I was going to have to testify against other people in my case. So what happened is that I told my lawyer that. He said, I'm not part of the Save It Paintball 13 committee. I'm here as your lawyer. I'm not here for their lawyer. And I said, look, if you think that it's in my interest to plead guilty, I'm not going to plead guilty until we all have a chance to sit down and talk about this, and they have plea deals offered to them as well. So the government agreed to offer us what's called the global plea. They made plea offers for all of us and gave it to us in a letter. And then the judge ordered us to be able to have a meeting of all the defendants. Some of us had been released on bond, and some of us were still in jail. I was still in jail. They denied my bond. So we all had a meeting with the co-defendants, and I gave them like I don't know if you guys are familiar with game theory, but game theory is like
I think you talked about this last time. You had the flow charts. How
flow chart?
Right?
I was like, listen,
if they pled not
like,
guilty, they'd be
guys.
screwed, right? Because all the evidence was against you, right? And that's
Right,
how I think. That's how guys got life.
Yeah, we have 5 people testifying against us, and these charges are going to, especially the gun charges, are going to mandate that the judge sentences to life. So in the end, what happened is that one brother, Ibrahim al-Hamdi, agreed to plead guilty. And when I heard their argument, see, the problem is that the brothers did not understand the situation we were facing. For example, so one of the brothers had just been released on bond. he thought that when the judge released him on bond, that meant that the judge thought he was not guilty and that everything was going his way, and I was like, no, brother, that's not. And they were this particular brother was offered a 5-year plea deal. Well, he went to trial and he got life, and the government offered him originally 5 years. Another brother, they offered him 2. He denied it. He rejected it because he had also been released on bond. And he very understandably was like, I have nothing to do with this. So, all I did was play paintball. So why should I, plead guilty to something that I didn't do? And I'm like, yeah, I understood his situation, because he, unlike the rest of us, or many of us, not only the rest of us, unlike many of us, he actually did not do anything. There were several people who were charged in my case who literally didn't do anything but go and play paintball. So, this brother was one of them. So they offered him 2. He went to trial, was found guilty, and got 8 years, which sounds like a lot maybe to some people, but he, really isn't, in the context of things. That was a.
And are these shortened by good behavior too, or?
Generally, you have to do 85% of your sentence. The government, there is no parole in the federal system, so you are allowed 15% of your sentence is deducted off the top for good behavior, and then if you have bad behavior, you lose that that good conduct time that they credit you with from the very beginning when you. Yeah, no. So the brothers decided that they would go to trial. So what happened with me is I'd signed a plea agreement saying that I agreed that I would cooperate and that I would that cooperation would amount to if the government wanted me to testify, then I would testify, and so on and so on. And I did sign this plea agreement, but in my mind, I was saying to myself, there's no way that the government is going to put me on the stand, for them, because I'm actually contradicting these 5 people who are cooperating with the government. So these 5 guys, Young Kwan, and Mahmoud Khwaja and other guys, these guys were all singing the government's tune in terms of Ali Tamimi told us that the Taliban, Mullah Omar had issued a call to the Muslims to all come and defend them, and this was the story of these guys, and that was not what happened. So I'm like, if the government puts me on the stand, I'm going to say that what they're claiming happened did not happen. So it turned out that in fact the government did not try to get me to testify against my co-defendants for that exact reason, because my version of events was the opposite of what the government's witnesses were saying. So they did put Ibrahim al-Hamdi on the stand, but that was kind of a fiasco because Ibrahim basically did exactly what I would have done, which was to tell the truth, and which was to say that it didn't happen the way that the government witnesses were saying. So they ended up trying to, I think, declaring him a hostile witness or something, and it just didn't go well with Ibrahim. But nevertheless, and again, as I mentioned, when it comes to whether or not the brothers are mad at him or something like that, then we were all in prison together in Terre Haute, Indiana, doing very well with one another. So if anyone wants to know about Ibrahim al-Hamdi, they can also contact the community out here in Maryland and Virginia and ask about whether the brothers are mad at Ibrahim.
Just so we don't lose track of where we're at. So you mentioned Terre Haute. This is after the conviction? You just fast forward a little bit, right?
Yeah, that came along in 2006. So I don't want to get too deep in the weeds on the legal situation, other than to say that, as the brothers went to trial, 2 brothers were found not guilty, and the rest of them were found guilty. And many people had already pleaded guilty. So we had the guys who cooperated and testified against them. They pleaded guilty way earlier, and they. And then I pleaded guilty. Ibrahim pleaded guilty. So ultimately, in the end, the only people going to trial were Masood Khan, Saifullah Chapman, Hamad Abdurrahim, and Khalifa Basha, and the Sabri bin Kahla. His case was severed, and he went to trial in a separate trial. They didn't try him with us. He was indicted with us, but They took him off our case because his case had almost nothing to do with ours. We just knew him. That was basically why they stuck him with us. So he went to trial on a different, in a different trial. So anyway, so what happened is that they were sentenced, and the way that the judge had to sentence them to. Why? Because these statutes, these gun statutes, mandate that the judge give them a certain sentence and cannot go below that sentence. So for that reason, Mas'ud Khan received life plus, I don't know, 30 years or something crazy. And then Saifullah Chapman got 85. That was later reduced to 65. And Brother Hamad got 8 years. And then the Brother Khalifa was found not guilty. And the Brother Sabri, in his separate trial, was found not guilty, although he was later indicted on something else and came to prison along with the rest of us, unfortunately. It was just another interesting story. But anyway, so those brothers were found guilty. So I, meanwhile, am sitting in Alexandria jail waiting to be sent off to prison because I was actually waiting to be sentenced. I hadn't been sentenced yet. And then to be sent to jail. Those brothers were all convicted, and they came, some of them were out on bond. When they were convicted, they were forced to go into custody, and they brought them into jail. And so we were all, sitting in the jail together. And then they sent us off to our prisons. I was sent to Allenwood Penitentiary, Allenwood Federal Correctional Institute, which is a medium security prison in Pennsylvania. And then the other brothers were sent to where they were sent to. Unfortunately, Mas'ud and Saifullah, because they had life sentences, I had a 20-year sentence. Mas'ud and Saif, they got, since they had essentially life, they were sent to maximums or high security facilities. I went to a medium because of my sentence was shorter. And that's how the Bureau of Prisons does it. So those brothers went off to their very difficult situations, and I went to mine, which was not as difficult as theirs.
Those guys went off to Colorado, right? That's where the...
No. Saifullah was sent to a place in Kentucky, and Mas'ud was sent to a place in down on the border with Kentucky and Virginia.
And they're all Supermax prisons? Or?
No, those are not Supermax. There's only one Supermax prison. Those are what's called... so the Federal Bureau of Prisons has these custody levels. They have minimum, which is a camp. They have low custody, which has a fence around it. They have medium, which is a tougher. It's tougher. It's tougher due to the security, and it's tougher due to the kind of people that you have in it. And then you have high security, which is, which are also known as penitentiaries. And the high security prisons are pretty rough. They're pretty rough, and they've got walls around them generally. So the difference here is the high security has a wall around it and very violent. The medium security has like a double fence and wire, razor wire, and also it has some pretty tough characters there, but not as bad as a penitentiary. And then you have the low, which low securities have fences around them, but the security is much more lax. And then you have minimums, which don't even have fences around them. So
are those the ones for the white-collar criminals?
Yeah, white-collar criminals, exactly. Yeah. So I went to a medium, and the brothers went to a step above me, which was the high security. But at this point, none of us were in the Supermax. That came later, as I'll explain. So when I got to Pennsylvania, I was immediately placed into solitary confinement because the prison saw that my charges were crazy looking terrorism related charges, and they decided to put me in solitary for a month till they figured out what kind of person I was, whether I was some kind of lunatic, extremist, whatever, as their paperwork seemed to show that I was. And by the way, let me point out that during this whole time in the county jail in Alexandria, while I was fighting my case, my relationship with my wife was deeply damaged because, first of all, we were fighting constantly because we were fighting about the logistics of what are we going to do? How are we going to, or how are we going to move forward? How are we going to live with this marriage? And And not only that, I was just like on edge all the time. She's on edge all the time because she's got 4 kids and she's, in her early 20s, and she was she's from Bosnia. She doesn't have any family here, so we're under so much stress. And so this really, really hurt our marriage a lot. And then
can we assume that things were like pretty good before you were arrested?
I was not the perfect husband, let me just put it that way, but we were together. We had 4 kids, and we were, we inshallah, I think we would have worked it out. We didn't have, I like I say, I was not the perfect husband.
But year 1 was when the strain started happening, or? Yeah,
it was really, I mean, we were already, working through our issues and stuff like that. But when I got arrested, then that was really, like I say, it was just all the stress of that. And I really recommend the movie if you guys want to know how that is. There's a movie called Felony. There's a couple movies called Felony, but this one's Felony. I got Val Kilmer in it, and it really it's like an indie type movie about a guy who goes to prison. It's the best movie I've seen that really shows how that dynamic is with the wife and the family, and how that is strained, when someone goes to prison. But anyway, so then when I got sent off to Pennsylvania, and I'm in the hole, I'm in solitary for a month, so now I can't talk to her on the phone. She can't visit me. It was very, very difficult. I was so depressed in Alexandria jail because I was cut off from my family that I went through a period where I couldn't even. The only reason I would get out of my bed at all was to eat and pray. Those are the only 2 things. Only or maybe take a shower, use a bath or something. But other than that, I would just lay in bed, sleeping and just being depressed. So when I get sent off to Pennsylvania, that was obviously even worse. And so I'm sitting there trying to figure out, this new life. Basically what it is like, this is your life now. Forget about that. Forget about the street. Forget about freedom. Forget about the life that you had. That life is over. And the more you think, as long as when you think about it, the more you think about it, the more you dwell on it, the more you worry about it, the more you continue. Your mind is still on out in the free world. The harder your prison time is going to be. So that's what everyone tells you when you first come in, and it sounds crazy and it sounds harsh, or you might say, oh yeah, I know, but it's really true, And it took me a while before I finally wrapped my head around the fact that I needed to deal with my day-to-day situation, and I can't micromanage my wife anymore. I can't be a husband anymore. I can't make those decisions anymore. I can't, I can't write checks to her. I can't, I can't be with her physically. I don't have that standing anymore. And so what it really does is it actually emasculates you. It turns you into less than a man, really. And in many ways, because you're no longer able to function as a husband. You basically become a ghost. You become if you guys have ever seen the movie Sixth Sense, where Bruce Willis is following his, he's a ghost and he's following his wife around and he's trying to have an impact in her life. And the only thing that he can really do is like make little noises that she might hear, and she'll look around and say, "What was that?" And that's what it's like,
Yeah.
And so Alexander Solzhenitsyn wrote in his book Alexander Solzhenitsyn was a Russian who was sent to the Gulag, the work camps in Stalinist Russia, and so he talks about how when he was in these work prisons in Siberia, he would write letters back to his wife and kids and stuff, and he said it was like taking a rock and throwing it into a pond and watching it, sink and disappear, and you never see anything from it again, And that's exactly what this was like. And actually, believe it or not, this is the most insane thing. Okay, so if you can imagine, like, okay, everyone's time is difficult when they first come to prison, but for me, because I had this case that was deemed to be a terrorist inmate, that's how the Bureau of Prisons classified me. they gave me only one 15-minute phone call a month. So the phone system there works. It's like a computerized phone system. You get on the phone and you punch in your personal access code or whatever, what they call a PAC number, or like a PIN number basically, and you punch that in, and then it'll you're allowed. The system allows you 300 minutes a month, and the system can be like for everyone's personal account, it can be adjusted. Or you can be blocked altogether. So for me, they made it so that I was only allowed 15 minutes, one 15-minute phone call a month. And so I'm in Pennsylvania, you know what I mean? I have one 15-minute phone call a month. I have 4 kids, a wife, and 2 parents, you know, so how am I going to divide 15 minutes between all these people, you know, and, you know, how am I going to, and then as far as visits, alhamdulillah, I was able to get visits. So there's a visiting room, and the family comes up, and you all sit like around a little coffee table type of thing and talk, and you can hug one another and stuff like that. But I'm in Pennsylvania, so my kids are in Virginia, so it was very hard for them. My wife didn't even know how to drive at that point, you know, not because someone accused me, I'm not going to say who it was. So one of these brothers accused me of that I was a Salafi and that I was not allowing my wife to drive because I was influenced by the Saudis or something. It's not like that at all. I was actually in the process of trying to teach my wife how to drive when I was arrested, you know. It was just we'd never gotten really around to it, and she wasn't that, you know, it just wasn't a thing, you know, that we really worried about. And so
well, the driver's exam is hard for a lot of immigrants right there, that it's in a different language, and that's some. Oh,
exactly. She was you know, she hadn't even been speaking English that long, so it was sort of one of those mountains to climb over that we just really had never really gotten around to doing. And so now you know, she had to find someone to drive her up there, and it was very, very difficult, you know. And then when I would see her, you know, of course everything's weird, you know, it's just weird, you know, because we know that we're having a rough time, you know. And then, so after their first visit, I'm going along to the chow hall. They released me from solitary, you know. So I'm going along the walk to the chow hall, and right before I get to the chow hall, there's this big guard who's he turned out to be the captain, who's like in charge of security for the prison, and he's a big like pro wrestler looking type of guy, and he says, "Hey, Royer." I say, "Yeah." He says, "Your wife is never going to visit you again for the next 20 years of your sentence." And I said, "Well, why is that?" He says, "Weren't you in Alexandria jail?" And I said, "Yeah." He says, "Well, your wife violated the regulations at Alexandria jail, and she took a photograph of you in the visiting room. Your wife is never going to visit you again." So I was like, "What are you talking about?" You know? And he's like, "Well, we got a call from some high-level people who say that that's what happened." I was like, "Man, look, man." I said, let me find out what that's about." Okay. So I go and I tell my wife about it. I wrote to her and I said, "This is what these people are saying here. And they're saying you're banned from coming up to see me because you took a photograph of me or something in the visiting room at Alexandria jail. So go to Alexandria jail and ask them to give you a letter saying that never happened." So what she did was she went and got a letter from Alexandria jail, and they wrote a letter saying this woman was never charged or never accused of anything inappropriate when she was visiting her husband. So she took that letter and also like people from the community started calling. At that time, like I had a lot of people from the community that were still kind of like interested in my case and stuff. So they were calling up to the jail. My parents were calling up. So anyway, as I'm walking along to go to the recreation yard about a week later, and the thing still wasn't resolved as far as I know, I see the guy again. "Hey, Royer." Yeah. He says, you need to tell your people to quit calling the warden and bothering the warden and calling me and bothering me." And I was like, "Well, I can't call them because you guys only allow me to have one 15-minute phone call a month, so I can't call them and tell them anything." He's like, well, you need to tell them or write to them or something because they're bothering us, you know. And he's like, "Oh yeah, so your wife can visit you now. We got it cleared up." So here's what the whole thing was about, right? The whole thing was that while I was in the county jail in Alexandria, one of the brothers from the community who was coming up to visit me took a picture of me with a camera phone. And that was a trip to me because I had never seen a phone with a camera before. And, I'd heard about it, but I hadn't seen one. So he took a picture of me. And then someone had started like a free ismailroyer.com or .org or something website. And they put that photograph on the website. Well, the government had become aware of this website and was kind of salty about it, as the kids say. And they contacted the Federal Bureau of Prisons and told them that my wife had taken this picture, but my wife had not taken the picture. And anyway, so this was just one of those things that the reason I went into this whole story is to show that, these kind of things happen and you're kind of like at people's mercy, and it's very difficult to resolve them. But now, okay, so my wife is being allowed to visit me now, but now check this out. Okay. So what happens is all of a sudden I'm not getting any letters from my wife, and she's not getting any letters from me. And I didn't know that she's not getting letters from me. All I knew was that I wasn't getting any letters from her. And all she knew was that she wasn't getting letters from me. But we did not know that, the other was experiencing the same situation. We just thought that we're writing letters and the other's not responding. And at the time, I was banned from making phone calls altogether. Oh, and by the way, okay, so this is a real, I got ahead of myself a little bit. What happened is that there was a riot at the prison, and when the riot happened, we were locked in. It was between the Hispanics and the DC blacks. So we were locked down for like a week or something like that. And we come out, and when we come out, they tell us, okay, everyone, you're allowed to use the phone, but you can only make 5-minute phone calls. So I said, okay, well, let me make a 5-minute phone call. And then I made another 5-minute phone call, and then I made another 5-minute phone call. So I was like, hey, maybe they've actually, like, in adjusting the phone calls for everyone, maybe they've like allowed me and taken that block off my phone and now allowed me to make 5-minute phone calls. So it turned out that was the case. There was some sort of glitch when they readjusted everyone's phone schedule. It wound up taking the block off of my phone, and now I was able to make more than 15 minutes of calls. So I think I made about 25 minutes of calls total. I think I called I made like 5-minute phone calls. Well, they charged me with a phone abuse violation. The BOP has what do you call it, like a disciplinary code. So one of the violations that you can violate is a serious phone abuse. So they charged me with serious phone abuse for going over my block or something. And my argument was, you guys are the one that took the block off me. I mean, why am I obligated to police my block myself? If you take the phone block off me, then I should be allowed to use a phone. That's your fault. And they didn't see it that way, of course. And so as punishment, they took 30 days of good time away, which meant I had to do another 30 days in prison off the end of my sentence. They put me in the hole for a month. They took all my phone calls.
The hole is solitary?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
They took my phone calls for a month, which anyway was only 6 months, which anyway was only 15 minutes a month anyway. And they took my visits for 6 months. So I'm in the hole. I got no visits coming for the next 6 months. I got no phone calls for the next 6 months. All I've got is letters. So I'm writing to my wife, and she's not responding to me. So my dad writes me a letter, and I'm in the hole, by the way. I'm in solitary. Okay, so my wife's not responding to my letters. So my dad writes to me, and he says, hey, to know why you're not answering her letters. And I'm like, what letters? I'm not getting your letters from her. I'm writing to her. And so we determined that way through my dad, we determined that the BOP, the prison was confiscating all the letters from me and all the letters from her. So what the heck is going on? So I finally get out of the hole. I still am not allowed to have visits or phone calls, so I can't communicate with her. But what I do is I tell my dad, listen, do this. Go to the post office, send me a letter, but send it return receipt, so that when it comes to the prison, whoever receives it at the prison has to sign, the receipt, and then send me. I said, have her give the receipt to you, and you send me a copy of the receipt. So in that way, I would be able to prove that her letters were coming to the prison, but that they were not giving them to me. So because this whole time I've been going to the captain and I've been going to the warden and saying, hey, what's going on with my letters? And they're like, we don't know what you're talking about. So I wrote like what's called a grievance. It's like a formal complaint. And I said, you guys are taking my letters. And they responded. They're like, you claim that we're taking your letters. We don't know what you're talking about. So anyway, my dad sends me this copy of this receipt, okay, showing that this security guy in the mailroom at the prison had received a letter from my wife, and it had his signature. So I took that receipt and I made a bunch of copies of it and stuck them everywhere. And then I went up to the warden and I said, warden, look at this. Here's this this guy here works in the mailroom, okay? And he signed this saying that he received it. Why did I not receive this letter from my wife? Why is it at the prison, but I didn't get it? And for that matter, where's the rest of her letters from me? And for that matter, where's my letters to her? And they're like, well, we don't know what you're talking about. So they're like, that thing that you got there, we don't, we don't know, we just don't know. So it was really insane. It was like Kafkaesque, like a Kafka novel. So I wound up, the grievance system that they have in the Bureau of Prisons has 3 levels. First, you complain at the warden's level in writing, and if they deny it, you complain to the regional office, because the Bureau of Prisons has different regional offices. And if they deny you, then you complain to the central office, which is in D.C., which by the way, I accidentally went to the other day, just totally on accident. I was trying to go somewhere else, and I wound up like opening the door, and it was actually the Federal Bureau of Prisons headquarters in DC. And I'm like, oh my God, this is the place I was always writing to and complaining, But anyway, so when I got to the central office level, they responded back and said, we looked into this. We talked to the warden. They say there's nothing to your complaints. They don't know what you're talking about. We don't know what you're talking about. Your case is, your complaint is rejected. So, it was like really insane. Now, here's the thing. Right after, like a day after I got that rejection notice from the central office, at mail call, because what they do is like they have a mail call where the correctional officer hands out the mail for the day. He calls Royer, so and everyone's standing around the table while he's throwing the letters on the table. So he calls me. He calls my name, and he throws on the table a stack of letters and wrapped up in a rubber band, all from my wife. And the stack of letters is like the dates on the postmarks are going back like 6 months. And then the most recent one was like, the ones that she'd been sending with the, with the return receipt on them. So I'm looking at the stack of letters. I'm like, what the? And I said to the CO, where'd this come from? The officer, where'd this come from? He goes, I don't know. It just came from the mailroom. It was in the mailbag. So I'm like, what the heck is going on? So I went and I talked to the warden. I said, what is this? Oh, and my wife told me, now at this point, 6 months have gone by. I got my phone calls back. So I call my wife, still only 15 minutes a month. But anyway, I call her and I say, hey, what did you? I said, you know what? I just got all your letters. And she says, I just got all your letters today. And she said, I opened the mailbox and there's like 10 letters from you. And I'm like, oh man, what the heck? So I go to the warden and I say, what is going on? Why were you guys confiscating all this mail here's all the letters that, so you see that I wasn't crazy. What was going on? She says, well, what it is that you were writing some kind of Arabic at the top of your letters. And we didn't know what that was. And we sent them off to be translated.
Oh my God.
And and what I was writing was Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim at the top of the letters. So I said, why didn't you guys just tell me, first of all, why didn't you tell me that to write in English only, and that if I write anything in Arabic, the letters are going to be confiscated until they can be translated? And she's like, those are security procedures. You're not we're not allowed to tell you about those things. So it turned out, actually, I found out later that they had now my wife was writing to me in Bosnian because she didn't speak English well enough to write letters in English, and I speak and read Bosnian. So she would write to me in Bosnian. I would write to her in English. So they were confiscating her letters because her letters were in Bosnian. And they had a contractor, the Bureau of Prisons had a contractor in Florida who was translating stuff for every Bosnian speaker in the Federal Bureau of Prisons, which is like 250,000 people. This one contractor in Florida, we had the contract to translate all Croatian, Serbian, Bosnian letters for the whole Bureau of Prisons. So my stuff, my wife's letters to me were all in this queue. So anyway, that was the situation. So we learned from that we were going to write to each other only in English. But the thing is that at this point, you have to understand that months have gone by where I have not spoken to my wife. I have not gotten a visit from her, and I have not gotten a letter from her. And meanwhile, I'm getting reports that there are brothers at the mosque who are all over her. Oh, we got you. We'll take care of you. You want us to teach the kids Quran? You want us to take the kids to the masjid? We got that. You want us to drive you? You want us to? Oh, if it's a really terrible situation about Ismail, and have you thought about what you're going to do? And well, we just want you to know that we're here for you. Whatever decision you want to make. If you want to stay with them, these kind of things are going in her ear, and she's young, and and she's in a very, very, very difficult situation, and we were already having a lot of problems, and so our marriage is deteriorating at this point, and so she asked me for a divorce, and we went through the 3-month thing. We actually it wasn't right away, it was like a month would go by, and then she would say, revoke that. I don't want to. I decided I didn't want a divorce, and so we went back and forth like that for a while. Anyway, let me shift right now to what's going on in prison. Okay, so what's going on in prison is that I come to find that Islam in prison is essentially a racial gang. Okay, Islam in prison. And by the way, I know I'm going to get, if I get a lot of complaints about Anwar Alaqi, I'm going to get a lot of complaints from people on this. But let me just be straightforward with you and with all the listeners, which is that the asl, the default, is that Islam is seen as a racist gang. Okay, so I'm not talking about Nation of Islam. I'm talking about Sunni Islam. Okay, who sees it that way? Well, first and foremost, the people who see it that way are the non-Muslims. The non-Muslims view Sunni Muslims as look. You got to understand that prison is a very different place than the real world. Okay, prison is segregated by race, and it's also segregated by geography. So you've got people, especially federal prison. So in federal prison, you've got people from all over the United States, but mainly from D.C. and also from New York, Philadelphia. Depending on where you are in the country, you've got Native Americans. A lot of Native Americans. You've got for various legal reasons, because when they get in trouble on their reservations, they get sent to federal prison instead of local jails and local prisons, state prisons. They come to federal prison. So there's a big Native American population. There's a big a Hispanic population, and there's also some whites, not too many, but they're there. So the white guys have figured out that their way of not being victimized is to be insanely over-the-top violent, like psychopathic violent, which is that was their way of essentially coping with I think being like a minority in prison. So you've got these white guys who are now I'm not talking about all of them. Not all of them are like that, but the white gangs are like that, and like the Aryan Brotherhood, which really doesn't exist in any mediums, but they've got hangers-on and admirers and stuff like that. So I'm dealing with white guys who think that I'm a race traitor because I'm a Muslim, and I'm trying to explain to them, look, I am not like trying to be black. I am who I am. I am perfectly happy and pleased with the way God made me, but I'm not trying to be something I'm not. It's just that my religion is just like some people are Buddhist or some people are whatever, Catholic or something. I'm Muslim. That's what my religion is. But the thing about it is, it's not that simple because, and picture yourself here, okay? You come to prison. Now, every federal prison is built the same way, whether these are prisons are built, last week or whether they were built in the 40s. And that is that there's two entrances in the chow hall, okay? The chow hall has two entrances, one on the left and one on the right. And they're cafeteria style, so that like the two lines, when you're going down the line along the sides of the chow hall big room, Here you go. Like, so there's a line going in the left door and a line in the right door, and these lines go along the wall. And then when you hit the back where they serve the food, then now you turn, you make a right angle, and you go along, and they give you your serve the food, as you can, if you can, like a counter. It's like a cafeteria counter, and they serve your food, and then they give you the food, and then you leave. So there's these two streams coming, one on the right, one on the left. Make right angles, and then meet in the middle, and then come out. So the line on the left is the line for blacks. The line on the right is the line for whites and Hispanics. Okay, so I'm going to the chow hall, and when I got to my housing unit, when I first got out of solitary confinement, when I first got to the prison, I come out, and the Muslims were automatically there waiting for me. They're like, yeah, we heard there was a white brother in the hole. It was just, we were waiting for you. We knew you were, everyone knows everything there. The laundry, people who work in laundry, they already know who I am and where I'm going, because they've received a list of who they need to issue clothes to. So my clothes are already waiting for me for when I come out of the hole, and they already know what unit I'm going to. So the guys who work in laundry go and say to the Muslims, hey, you got a brother coming into your unit. And they're like, oh, yeah, really? What's his name? Oh, okay, where's he from? Oh, he's from Virginia? Oh, yeah. They already knew. They were like, oh, yeah, well, we read in the Muslim Link about you. We get the Muslim Link here. We read about your case, and we saw that you were coming. So they were already waiting for me for when I got to the housing unit. And there's African American brothers and a Syrian brother. Okay, so I wasn't looking at it as anything racial. And by the way, neither were these brothers. Okay, so I'm going to explain more what I mean by the racial component of it. Okay, so these brothers who I'm with, they're not like on any type of racial time either. Okay, so I'm just like we were talking about in the beginning about how when you meet someone and you just feel like you're on the same page and stuff like this. These are brothers who I feel like, I'm on the same page with them. These are people who are serious about the deen. They're interested in the religion, and they're greeting me with open arms, that type of stuff. Alhamdulillah, I was really happy. I felt like a really, it sucked to be in prison, but I felt like I'm with, some good brothers here. So now we go off to the chow hall. I don't know anything about how this works, the politics of it. So I'm going with them, and we go to the line on the left. Why? Because I'm just walking with them, and they're going through the left line. And I look over and I notice that people are looking at me kind of weird because I'm white and I'm in the black line. And no one told me this was the black line, but I look and I see that everyone in this line is black except me. And I'm looking over and I see everyone in that line over there is white and Hispanic. And some people over there kind of taking notice of the fact that I'm over in this other line.
What about the Syrian brother? Was he in line with you?
Yeah, the Syrian brother was in the line with me. So that's and that's kind of weird too for them, because a lot of foreign Muslims, sometimes they get caught up in this thing of, do they want to be considered black or do they not? And that has actually consequences. It's not a racist thing. It's just that choices you make as to what line you get in have consequences down the road. It's not like, oh, I don't want to be in a line with blacks, or I don't want to be in a line with white. It's not. I don't want to be in a line with whites because I'm trying to be black or something like that, or I don't want to be in a line with, it's not those kind of calculations. The calculations are what effect is this going to have on my relationships with other inmates in prison, and that's a very important thing. Because imagine this, if I had gone with these brothers to the chow hall, and I look around and I see that over there is the line with the white guys and the Hispanics, and they're looking at me kind of weird, and I tell them, hey guys, no offense, but I'm gonna go over there and get in that line over there. You know how it is, guys. You know what I'm saying? You feel me, right? It'd be kind of weird for me to be in this line over here. Well, they're gonna get offended at that. They would have told me, man, don't worry about all that, man. Just you're with us. We go in this line here. Just go with us. So that's what they would have said. You know what I mean? But at the same time, these white dudes over here are looking at me like, what the hell? Oh, so we got one of these. We got one of these on our hands now. You know what I mean? So that's automatically the bag I'm in, right? So then I come into the chow hall, and guess what? There's the left side of the chow hall is black. And the right side of the chow hall is where the whites and Hispanics sit. Okay. So now where am I gonna sit with the Muslims? The Muslims have a table. Everyone's got a table, by the way. So as I mentioned to you that like the things are segregated by race and they're also segregated by geography and they're segregated by gang. So you got a table that is the Sunni Muslim table. You got a table that is the Nation of Islam table. You got a table that's Moorish Science Temple of America. You got a table that's DC. You got a table that's Philadelphia, non-Muslim Philadelphia, but sometimes the Muslims from Philadelphia sit there. And then you got Baltimore table. You got New York table. You got Ohio table. This is all black. Okay, on the black side. Over on the Hispanic side and white side, you got the MS-13 table, you got the Paisa table, you got the Border Brothers table, you got the Aztecas table, you got the is for the white guys, you got the white guys from Ohio, you got the white guys from you got the certain gangs, So this you could map these chow halls out.
Are there Nazis too?
Yeah, there are Nazis, and there's a gang actually called the Nazi Lowriders. You got the Aryan Resistance Movement. You got, it just goes on and on and on. So you cannot mess up and sit at the wrong table. Okay, so they'll tell you to leave. I mean, they're not going to spaz out on you, but they'll tell you leave, man. Hey, man, you'll be out of pocket. So I go and first of all, where am I going to sit? If I go and I sit with the white guys, I got to sit with the right white guys. I got to sit with maybe like the independent guys. That's realistically where I would have sat. I would have had to sit with the independent guys. Those independent guys are going to want to see my pre-sentence report, which is the report that the probation office issues to the judge, which tells them what my charges are and whether I cooperated and so on and so on. They want to know what my charges are, who my co-defendants are. Did I cooperate with the government? Did I get a time cut because I cooperated with the government and so on and so on? They want to see all that stuff if I'm going to sit at their table. And my sitting at their table is not just me sitting at their table. That means also that's who I'm going to work out with. That's who I'm going to hang out with. I can't, if someone had advised me while I was in the county jail, getting ready to go to federal prison, they said, look, you're going to need to get with those white dudes and tell them right when you get off the bus, go out there and right when you hit the yard, go and tell them, hey, listen, this is my situation. I'm a Muslim. That's my religion, but I'm not with like the Muslims in prison in terms of I'm not like trying to be black. I'm not part of their shenanigans. I'm not going to get involved in that stuff. I'm just a white dude who's a Muslim. Well, if I'd have done that, and possibly that's one way to do it, to be honest, you know what I'm saying? But I didn't do it. I didn't do that because when I got off the bus, the first people to meet me, they were brothers who welcomed me with open arms in the same kind of loving manner that you would get from if I met you guys. You know what I mean? Right. When I met you for the first time, that's how they treated me. So with that, it didn't even make any sense that I would go over with these dudes. But at the same time, right? So here's this riot that jumps off. The riot jumps off, and the Muslims are to be honest, first of all, not only are they seen as a black group, because they are all black, actually, except for a few white guys who are trying to be black, frankly, you know what I'm saying? And also like a few Arabs and stuff, you know what I'm saying? But mainly they're seen as a black gang. So if anything happens where, every prison is about alliances, okay? So who are the Muslims aligned with? The Muslims are aligned with New York, DC blacks, New York blacks, Philadelphia blacks. That's who they're aligned with. It's just how it happens. Why? Because a lot of these guys are from New York and Philly and so on and so on. So they got homies. And some people, let's say like their identity of being Muslim is sort of like not fully Muslim. In other words, they got 1 foot over here and 1 foot over here. So a lot of people are really, frankly, just being Muslim because it's like they get benefits from it, and they're not really committed to being Muslim. Or if they're like halfway committed, but not really, and so on. So those dudes really, frankly, are the majority of Muslims in prison. I
heard the food is better for the Muslims. Is that true?
No, not really. Not really. The food's the same for everyone. So now, man, I have found myself in a situation where I am somehow or another committed to being when stuff goes down, I'm now committed to like the black side, So I don't want to be. I mean, like, why should I? I don't care about that. Why? I don't have any beef with Hispanics. You know what I'm saying? I don't have any beef with white dudes. Why should I be? But I am. That's now that's the situation. You know what I'm saying? So that's what I have to deal with, and that's what I was dealing with at Allenwood. Okay, so anyway, man. So crazy situation happens is that the imam, who is so the prison, every group has like a leader. So the leader of the Muslims is the imam. In other groups they call him the shot caller. Well, our shot caller is the imam. So the imam is someone who really, and this actually usually tends to be the case in prison. The serious practicing Muslims tend to rise to the top. Usually, not always. They tend to rise to the top of leadership in in prison. So the shura, the majlis, and the imam were in Allenwood were people who really actually mainly cared about the religion and actually not being racial at all, but in fact being, like real Muslims. That's what they cared about. And they cared about studying and learning Islam. And so they used to have classes and stuff like that. Well, the imam asks me to do the khutbahs. So he, once a month. He's doing the khutbahs 3 times a month. And he asked me to do them once a month because I knew the khutbah al-hajjah and I knew, alhamdulillah, something about the deen and so on and so on. So he asked me to do the khutbahs. So I started doing the khutbahs. Well, once a month. Well, what happens is that there's this riot between the Mexicans and the blacks. We're locked down. We come out, and the DC guys are mad, and the rest of the African American groups are mad at the Muslims because the Muslims, under our brilliant imam, chose to stay neutral in the whole situation. So the black guys are like, "Hey, why did you Muslims stay neutral? When we were being attacked by these Mexicans and by these whites, why did you stay neutral in this situation?" And so our imam tells them, look, if we were to be like fully like you allied with you guys, then we would be dragged into every situation that you guys get yourselves into, and it seems like every 6 months you guys are rioting with Mexicans, so we don't want to be a part of that. And the imam told them, but we will unite with you or ally with you if you promise to make us the ones who communicate with the Mexicans on your behalf. And you promise that if you guys get into any kind of situation without asking us first, then you're on your own. We're not going to have anything to do with that. That's your problem. So actually, because the Muslims there, and this is near Philadelphia, this is in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, there's so many Muslims there and so many Muslims from Philadelphia in prison, that the Muslims had like, one of the biggest groups, if not the biggest groups, black groups on the compound. So the Muslims decide, our imam decides to go with that, and those guys agreed with it. So what happens is, unbeknownst to them, our imam was actually really friendly with the leader of the Mexicans. So he goes over to the leader of the Mexicans and he says, yeah, I finally got these dudes over here under control. And so by doing that, he actually brings peace to this prison that had not been, peaceful for a long time. So the imam and the Mexican leader start talking, and the Mexican leader says, well, you know what, now as long as we're, on good terms here, we wanted to bring to your attention that we're having a lot of problems here with this prison because they're not giving us any education. We're 50% of this population. They're not giving us any educational materials in Spanish. They don't, they're discriminating against us in this way and that way and the other way. And then the imam's like, well, yeah, we got problems over here. People have been grumbling because they don't have a dentist and da-da-da-da-da. So, I don't know how, this probably wasn't too wise, but, somehow or another they conclude that being united now, they're going to take a stand against the prison authorities over certain things that the prison authorities were doing. So they all conclude that we're going to have a hunger strike. We're going to have a food strike, and no one's going to go to the chow hall on a certain day, like on Monday or whatever, the upcoming Monday. Everyone was going to boycott the chow hall as a demonstration of, there being, these conditions of confinement that were harsh against us and stuff like that. So they write their list of demands in English and in Spanish, and it's clear that from the demands that some of these demands are coming from the Hispanics and some of them are coming from the blacks. And this was like crazy for the institution because they're like, oh man, what? These guys were always fighting. Now they've got like combined demands and stuff. And so they panicked and they locked everything down. This is like well before the Monday that was supposed to be the everyone staying out of the chow hall. They locked us down, and the imam was my cellmate, because when you're in a cell, you have a cellmate. Okay, so the imam is my cellmate. So they come and they pull everyone one by one out of their cells, and the prison intelligence people are asking what is going on, who is organizing this. And so everyone says, or I don't know about everyone, but someone is telling them it's the imam. It's the imam and the head of the Mexicans. They're organizing it. So they come and they take the imam out of my cell and they lock him up. They put him in the hole. And then they let us out a few days later, and they do an announcement and say, look, we're gonna give you guys some educational materials in Spanish. We're gonna hire some new dentists. And by the way, the leaders of these groups are all being shipped to other prisons. So the imam goes to the hole. Well, so when they release us from our cells, we come out, and the Muslims, we kind of group up and convene. All the groups are all the different racial and gang groups and stuff are convening. So the Muslims get together. Me and the Majlis Ashura, we all get together and we're like, what happened to the imam? We're like, man, they came and they took him out. They locked him up. He's in the hole. So they're like, well, who's the leader? And I said, when they took him out, they told me to say that so-and-so he told me to tell you guys that so-and-so is the new imam. So it was a brother, So the brother's like, well, I don't want to be the imam. And I said, well, man, that's too bad, because the imam said that you're supposed to be the imam. He's like, well, I don't want to be the imam. So we have no leadership. And now here comes Jum'ah. I'm the only one who knows how to do khutbahs. So I start doing the khutbahs. I do the khutbah that Friday. I do the khutbah the next Friday. I was on the Majlis Ashura, so I had some standing, but I'm the only white dude really in the community. There was a couple others, but I mean, I was only guy who had any kind of respect or anything. And so I do a khutbah I said, who really loves Allah? And I mentioned the test of if you love Allah, then follow me. So I mentioned the ayah where Allah says that the test, if someone really loves Allah, is whether or not he follows the Sunnah. And I said, you got this guy. I said on the minbar, I said, I'm not going to mention any names, but there is a certain brother who during Ramadan was talking about how he was about to get out of prison, and when he gets back to Baltimore, he's going to sell heroin, and he's going to do this, and he's bragging about this in Ramadan as we're about to break our fast. I said, so is this a person who really loves Allah? Can he really be someone? Because this is not following the Prophet, and so on and so on, right? So this is the khutbah I do, okay? Well, this guy, okay, what he does is he goes and starts organizing an insurrection against me. And he's like a Worth Team Muhammad guy, so he's organizing it on racial grounds. He's going around saying, man, we got this slave master up here, telling us what to do, and I mean, it was just absolutely, it started getting really crazy.
Wait, the story was about him though, right? Yeah.
The story was about him.
Oh, okay.
It was a very bad decision on my part to do that, but I didn't mention his. I mean, look, I learned.
Hey, the rule for the wise: never confide in khatibs. They will end up using your story in the khutbah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, the guy was publicly doing it, but I still didn't mention his name. But I guess he felt mad. He was just furious at me. So what he realized was something that I did not realize, which was how precarious my situation was. I was only in a position of respect and authority because the imam, who was black, was kind of putting that on me. But I was really just some dude from the suburbs, white kid from the suburbs. I'm not I didn't have any street cred. I wasn't, you know what I'm saying? I wasn't someone who really knew how. I was a fish out of water, and I'm white. And so I really am not in a position to be up there making khutbahs like that. So he saw my vulnerability and he started attacking me and undermining me. And not only that, he was mad about the whole regime because the imam had these guys who were making alcohol and the guys who were hanging out with the homosexuals. He had them under, strict supervision. You know what I'm saying? He had kind of put them in their place.
You should have given that hadith of the Prophet when someone wants to become the emir, kill the latter.
Yeah. Well. So So what this guy does is he goes and he organizes not only the racists, but he also is organizing the guys who are like mad because they can't hang out with their boyfriends or because they can't drink alcohol and stuff like that. And he's organizing these dudes. So now on my side, we had the Majlis Ashura and some other brothers who were, serious about it. So serious about the deen. So anyway, this whole situation is coming to a very ugly head. Okay. So, and by the way, it's not that I wanted any kind of position, but it's just like if I wasn't doing khutbahs, there's not going to be anyone who even knows how to do khutbahs. So what happens is I'm walking along with the brothers from the Majlis, and right before they're about to call lockdown at night, and we're walking along the compound, and we see this dude and his group of guys that he's organizing around. And so now we're two groups that are like about to bump into each other. So I go up to him and I say, "Assalamu alaikum," and I stick my hand out to shake his hand. And he refuses to shake my hand. And one of the brothers says, "How come you're not shaking his hand?" One of the brothers on my side, he said, "Why don't you shake his hand?" And I'm trying to put him in a position where he's, he looks bad. You know what I'm saying? Now he's the one refusing to shake my hand. I'm trying to shake his hand. He's refusing to shake my hand. So the brothers on my side started their body language started getting kind of, aggressive, and the guys on his side started getting aggressive. And the officer who's in charge of the compound, he sees it, the lieutenant, he sees this and he says, "All right, lock it down, lock it down." It was almost time to lock down anyway. So he locks it. He makes us go to our cells, our housing units and stuff like that. Breaks everything up. So I go to my housing unit. At this time, I didn't have a cellmate because the imam was, in the hole. So I go in there, close the door, and start to use the bathroom. I had to really use the bathroom. So when you use the bathroom, you put a towel up, hang it over your cell door so that it, the cell doors are like solid and they've got like one kind of sliver of a window. So you hang a towel over that so that no one looks in. And it's also kind of a sign that you're using the bathroom. So I throw the towel up and I sit down, to start using the bathroom. Well, all of a sudden, the lieutenant who had seen us out there flings open my door. I actually hadn't sat down yet, so it was cool. So anyway, so he flings open my door and he comes in with another officer and he says, "Royer, what's going on?" I said, "What are you talking about?" He says, "What was that about out there?" And I said, "I don't know, man. That's some kind of misunderstanding or something." He's like, "Is he going to get hurt? Is that guy going to get hurt?" I said, "Nah, he's not going to get hurt." I said we were about ready to talk it out and figure it out when you made us break it up. And he's like, "Well, how come he wouldn't shake your hand?" And I was like, I guess he observed all that, right? I said, "I don't know. I don't know, but I said, "There's not going to be any problem with that, sir." He's like, "All right, well, you just make sure if there's going to be any problems, I don't want there any problems to be any problems on my compound." I was like, "All right, no, it's no problem, it's no problem." Anyway, the next morning, the officer comes and wakes me up 5-something, in the morning and says, "You need to report to the lieutenant's office." Well, when they tell you to report to the lieutenant's office, that means you're going to the hole. They said, "Bring your ID." So I was like, "All right." So I go to the lieutenant's office. I bring my ID, and they say, You're going to the hole." I was like, "All right." I knew it. I figured it was just had something to do with this dude. So I go to the hole, and they won't tell me why I'm there. So like 3 days later, they come and they tell me, "Hey, come with us." So I was like, "Where am I going?" They're like, just come with us." So they take me to R&D. R&D is like the area where they you either come into the prison or you leave the prison, right? So it's like the area where they process you in or out. So they put me in there, and I see there's 3 guys with riot gear on, all black riot gear, helmets, everything. 3 officers. And I'm like, "Oh my God, what in the hell is going on?" And so they like, "Come with us." The process, but those dudes are not talking to me. They're not saying a single word to me. And I say, what's this all about? Dude clenches his teeth and says, "It's the order of the day."